Hi everybody, this is Mr. Bickno. I'm sorry I can't be here today. I'm dealing with a sick kid at home. So I put together this little video that'll wrap up the figurative language discussion that we had on Friday. So everybody make sure that you get out your worksheet, and whoever's in charge of the class, feel free to pause this when you need to. So let's begin. We're going to start with a quick review of everything that we talked about on Friday. So these are all of the different things. They're in the order that they are in the packet. A simile compares two things using like or as. So if you said, for example, that her face shone like the sun, that would be a simile. A metaphor makes a direct comparison. It compares two things by saying one thing is another, without using like or as. So if we said, for example, her face was the shining sun, then that would be an example of a metaphor. Alliteration is the repetition of the first consonant sound, and that creates an effect. We talked about how that can sometimes create sort of an effect depending on what the letters is. We walked through the weird woods with that repeated W sound, for example. Hyperbole, outrageous exaggeration for emphasis. Remember, we talked about this in every class. Hyperbole is when you want to go big. So you say, my teacher gave me 1,000,000 years worth of homework. Something like that. Now, if you're in 6th period, we did not get to personification, but it was in the Khan Academy video. So make sure that you get this down. You might want to pause the video at the end here. Personification gives human traits to animals, objects, or ideas. The example that it gives on the sheet that says shoes, I think, is really interesting. You think about the book Ghost. When Ghost is going to the shoe store, he sees those shoes on the shelf, those really nice track shoes. An example of personification might be saying, those shoes speak to me, meaning that those shoes, I relate to them. I have their vibes. You know, they aren't literally speaking. But again, personification gives those sort of traits. So, one more that is on the packet you're going to do that was not on the worksheet. So just as a review, this was in the Khan Academy video though. An allusion, a reference to literature, movies, and culture. So we're going to wrap up, finish up the last 3, and then you can get on to your assignment. Okay, this next one is a spelling nightmare, which I'm sure you've heard of this before. It's pronounced onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia, the examples we have, the loud boom of the fireworks scared the dog. The bird's tweets outside my window woke me up. If you can't tell, onomatopoeia is sound words. So these are words that sound like their meaning or mimic other sounds. We use this to kind of create an effect where you can not just see but can hear really what's happening in a narrative. An example that I would put up here is when you describe the kaboom of lightning. That's a big noise. That's a big noise. I suppose it's technically the thunder, but still, you get the idea. So if you want to pause for a second and write these down and come up with more examples, we can do that right now. Now we're going to talk about idioms. And we did talk about idioms on Friday. Every class I talked about how we talked about a piece of cake. When we say something is a piece of cake, there's no actual cake there. So you understand that it is just an expression that means something is easy. The definition that this gives is that a phrase with a non-literal meaning that is hidden or figurative. So a way that I always like to explain idioms is that they come from culture. Idioms come from the culture that they're in. So I mentioned a piece of cake, so I'll put that up there as one of them. Knock it out of the park is another idiom. Now, if you were someone who came from another culture, the phrase knock it out of the park wouldn't make any sense. You have to have that kind of almost American background and understanding a little bit about what baseball is to understand that when we say knock it out of the park, we mean succeed at something. So, idioms come from the culture that they're in. We aren't literally knocking it out of the park when we get an A on a test, but it gives us kind of the same feeling of hitting a home run in baseball. Other idioms are things like let the cat out of the bag. Why did you put the cat in the bag? Go out on a limb, meaning to take a risk. These are examples of things that are not literal, but they're just sort of expressions that have secondary meanings. So you should pause this for a second, let everybody write it down, and then we can move on. Our last little linguistic trick that we're going to talk about today is the oxymoron. Now, an oxymoron is not just an insult you call Mr. Bicknell behind his back, I hear you talking. It's also a phrase that's made up of several words with opposite meanings. So the examples that it gives here are jumbo shrimp. You got jumbo, big, shrimp, small. Calm storm, kind of a contradiction of ideas there. Some that you hear people say a lot are like same difference. Which just means, same thing, but still. Old news. News is something that is, by definition, new. Old news is therefore sort of a contradiction, an oxymoron. And a very famous one from Shakespeare is, parting is such sweet sorrow. That's sorrow, sadness versus sweetness. So this can create sort of an interesting effect when you use it. So I will give you a second to write these down. Might want to pause the video before we wrap up. Okay, so with that, you should have everything you need to finish the activity over the Sonia's Adventure packet. So keep this handy, use this as a guide, and you should be able to find the figurative language and literary devices that you see in this story. Thank you all. I hope to see you all again tomorrow. Bye-bye.